Welcome back everybody to part 3 of our mini-series featuring the main player characters in the Assassin's Creed board game, where we paint and rank them from the best to the worst assassin. And today we have the first rose among the thorns, Alessendra. Alessendra's sculpt has a very strong and stoic pose, which is actually very consistent with her character and backstory, which we are going to explore later. But first up, we're going to clean up her mole lines. On my first pass, she didn't look like she had too many mole lines, but there was a pretty nasty one down the side of her arm, which also followed through into her armor. To get a clearer look, I rinsed off the shavings with a bit of water and found that I also missed this large mole line on the left side of her cape, which I smoothed out with a needle file. Once she's all cleaned up, I hit her with the black primer and follow up once again with an airbrush with zenithal priming, building up the layers starting from somber grey and gradually adding in Rakarth flesh all the way up until a final highlight of off-white. With the base coats done, we're ready to move on to the next phase, which is to use the brush to enhance the colours on her white robes, and for this I prepared the 3 colours, Sombre Grey, Rakarth Flesh and Off-White for the blending process. To start off, we create a light wash using Sombre Grey mixed with a little bit of black to define the shaded areas on the model. After the shaded areas are sketched in, we're going to build up the white highlights by adding in Rakarth Flesh. Alessendra doesn't have as many white portions as Claudio or Bastiano, but her sculpt does have very well defined sections which provide a good opportunity to practice blending. You can see how with the addition of more Rakarth Flesh into the mix, it really changes the tone of the clothes from the base coat. Many players probably choose to play Alessendra because she is just so on the table. She is a Her ability is basically guaranteed damage anytime she attacks, and without spoiling too much, her other abilities greatly increase her offensive and defensive capabilities. She is the quintessential warrior class. But Alessendra has a pretty tragic backstory where she had a tongue cut out as a result of intrigue involving her parents, and I bet you didn't know that she was actually mute. I think this is a model where the backstory really corresponds with the model very well, and you get a strong sense of the strong silent character behind the miniature from the model's sculpt. After a bit of work, the general idea for the white is there, and I start working on the boots with a little bit of Wyldood. And I then go back and highlight the white with off-white, and you can see how it's very easy to achieve a dramatic contrast by simply painting brighter and brighter highlights towards the extremities of her clothes. Next, we're going to work on the most distinctive and obvious feature of the sculpt, which is her armor, and we're going to try and paint this using a non-metallic metal method as well. Firstly, I wanted to give a bit of tonal variation, so I first give it a light wash of Incubi darkness. But after one pass, I realized that the shade wasn't dark enough, so I add in a little bit of black to get better shading and definition. While the paint is still wet, I add in a bit of the Sombre Grey into the mix, as I wanted to do some wet blending to establish a lighter mid-tone on the raised parts of the armor. While that dries, I paint the red trim on her robes as well as her belt sash with a base coat of chaotic red. I then work some more on her armor by highlighting the details using the mid-tone colour Sombre Grey, and then following up with a further highlight by mixing in more and more off-white. The armor is slowly starting to take shape, but the contrast is still not very strong, and so it doesn't really stand out, but not to worry, we will work further on increasing the contrast later on. So we take a quick break from the armor to highlight the red portions using Mephiston red, and also at the same time give another highlight pass on her white robes using off-white. Now we're going to start working on her face, and for this I want to give her a lighter skin tone starting with Kislev Flesh, which I then shade with a little bit of flesh mixed with purple. This is the same recipe I use for the courtesans for nice female skin, and then once that's done I highlight the face with Kislev Flesh mixed with a touch of off-white. I then give the armor another highlight pass with off-white to further improve the contrast. I try to just hit only the edges and points of the details to create the illusion of reflection and draw attention to the details. We will now get ready to paint her sword, and I start by applying a base mid-tone layer of bronze flesh tone to prepare for the gold NMM. I then start working on the sword NMM, and there's a bunch of color theory behind how to paint non-metallic metal, and truth be told, I'm no expert, but I'll try and explain the basic methodology which may be helpful to beginner painters. Generally, you take one flat surface and divide it into 3 sections. These sections will be alternated between dark and light, and you can sketch in these values first on the model. The other half of the sword will use an alternate pattern, and this is to bring out the contrast in the previous side and create the illusion of reflective metal. This is the basic approach to painting NMM, where you envision where the light will fall, creating the brightest spot on the area, and then creating a contrast to create the illusion of reflections. Once you have sketched out the areas of light and dark, simply blend them together. The approach for gold is similar, and I first paint in the shaded areas with Wyldood to establish the darker areas, and I then pick out the lighter areas where the light hits using bronze flesh tone and eventually highlighting it with off-white as well. Lastly, you can use a very strong final highlight of off-white to pick out certain edges, which will also help to tie in all the blending. We're almost done with Alessendra, and to paint her base I use a layer of Ushabti bone, and at the same time I'm going to stipple some highlights onto her boots using our Steel Legion Drab. Once that's done, it's time for washes, and I apply the usual wash of SoftTone followed by green tone onto her base, and I also apply a layer of Agrax Earthshade onto her boots to blend up all that stippling on the leather. As a final touch, I use Agrax Earthshade to shade the low parts of the armor, and also use blue tone to shade the higher areas to create a little nice tonal variation. I then give her one last final pass of highlights over the metal areas, painting in little points of reflection using pure off-white to really bring out those details. With a quick bit of dry brushing on her base, follow up by painting in the bezels with her character color sky blue, Alessendra is officially done. I am absolutely certain that Alessendra is gonna be high up on most people's list. While her sculpt is somewhat neutral, her pose really exudes confidence and her heavy armor really makes her stand out. In game, she is a one-man army with enough offensive abilities to take on hordes of guards by herself. Coupled with heavy armor and other defensive equipment, she is an absolute tank. So this puts Alessendra ahead of Bastiano, but I'm leaving Claudio in first because I'm just a sucker for hidden blades. Is anyone else here an Alessendra simp? Let me know in the comments below, but if you're a fan of Daria, you're gonna want to watch this next video.